The mop moved slowly across the tiled floor, catching the last rays of morning light as it flickered through the tall windows of Monroe University's science building. Jamal Reed kept his eyes down, earbuds tucked beneath his hoodie, lost in the rhythm of the work, in the hum of a world he'd never quite been invited into. Every night, he cleaned the classrooms where dreams were stitched together in the language of logic and proof. But during the day, he remained a shadow, silent and unseen, a 20-year-old young man working to survive in a place that only knew him as a uniform, not a mind. The halls echoed with brilliance. Top-tier students rushing between lectures, polished professors with credentials longer than most novels, and walls lined with accolades from a university that prided itself on being the birthplace of future Nobel winners. But for Jamal, it was a kingdom he could never claim. He was the ghost in the room after the lights went out. That morning, like so many others, he lingered a second longer than he should have outside Lecture Hall B. Through the glass door, he watched the man he had only ever seen from a distance, Professor Elliot Worthington. The name carried weight. Published over 40 times. A theoretical physics legend, once featured on the cover of a science journal under the title, The Architect of the Universe. But inside that room, in that moment, the aging professor didn't look like an architect. He looked irritated. His booming voice bounced off the walls. "You've all failed to grasp the basics," he roared, his accent thick, his tone slicing through the air like ice. "If this is the best our generation can offer, then God help the next." Jamal blinked, tightening his grip on the mop handle. The tension in the room was palpable. Students sat hunched in their seats, avoiding eye contact, their notebooks filled with frantic scribbles and half-solved equations. And then, just as Jamal turned to walk away, something happened. The professor's eyes landed on him. "You there!" Worthington's voice thundered through the small crack of the door. "Yes, you! The young man in the hallway!" Jamal froze, mop in hand, heart suddenly pounding in his chest like a warning drum. He turned slowly, unsure whether to pretend he hadn't heard or to obey the command of a man he had no business engaging with. "Come in," Worthington said, gesturing. "Come on, let's see if someone from outside these walls has a better brain than the rest of this room." There were smirks, a few giggles. Someone whispered, "This'll be good." Another said, "He's the janitor, right?" Jamal stepped forward. Each step felt louder than the last. The floor creaked beneath his shoes. His palms were sweating. 1,000 eyes burned into him as he passed the rows of students who looked at him like he was part of some cruel joke. "What's your name?" the professor asked, arms folded. Jamal Reed," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Well, Jamal Reed," Worthington said, motioning toward the board. "Perhaps you'd like to try what my students clearly cannot." He pointed to the swirling chaos of chalk marks behind him. "Solve this." The board was a monster, covered in partial differential equations, matrix notation, gravitational constants, and force diagrams. It was enough to make most students sink into their chairs. But Jamal felt something shift. His fear, strangely, gave way to something else, something deeper, something that had lived inside him since the first time he watched a video on quantum entanglement from a borrowed phone screen in the back of the city bus. He stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a piano for the first time in years, fingers itching to touch what they remembered so well. He picked up the chalk. It felt familiar. With a breath, he began to erase parts of the board, not in haste, but with intention. He rearranged the equation's structure, paused to rework a matrix calculation, then transitioned into applying a Lagrangian approach that made the entire room go still. Worthington's brow furrowed. The students leaned in, the clock ticked, and then silence. Jamal turned to the professor. "The system's unstable under the assumed boundary conditions," he said softly, tapping the final boxed answer. "But if you account for the shifted frame of reference, The equation balances. Worthington blinked. Not a word. Not a sound. One student gasped. Another whispered, "He's right." The professor stepped closer, inspecting the board like it had betrayed him. After a full minute, he finally turned, voice quieter. "Where did you learn that?" "I didn't," Jamal replied, still holding the chalk. "I just studied on my own." A heavy silence pressed down on the room. The professor gave a nod, tight, awkward, uncertain, and said, "Class dismissed." Jamal returned the chalk, walked out with the same mop he came in with, and disappeared down the hallway before anyone could ask another question. But that moment refused to stay hidden. By the time night fell, students were buzzing. Twitter feeds blew up. Posts went viral. "Janitor solves elite physics problem," read one caption. "Monroe's real genius," said another. And by morning, Jamal's name was no longer a whisper. It was a shout. In the dorms, students debated whether it was real. In the faculty lounge, professors muttered in disbelief. But one person, Maya Ellis, didn't just talk. She acted. Maya, a sharp and fearless journalism student, had seen Jamal in the hall before, always moving quietly, never looking up. She found him that evening in the custodial break room, sipping instant coffee and flipping through a tattered physics book that looked older than most of the students on campus. "Jamal?" she asked gently. He looked up, unsure if he should run or stay. "I just want to hear your story," she said. "You don't have to impress anyone. Just tell me what you love." He hesitated, but something in her voice, her sincerity, her warmth, made the words begin to flow. He told her about his grandma, about nights spent studying by candlelight during power outages, about YouTube lectures on thermodynamics and black holes, about dreaming of studying in classrooms he could only clean. He told her how numbers made him feel safe, how solving equations gave him hope, how physics made sense in a world that often didn't. The next morning, her article dropped. The brilliant. Mind sweeping our halls. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't exaggerated. It was honest, raw, human, and it caught fire. By noon, Jamal's inbox, one he barely checked, was flooded. Professors from Yale, Stanford, MIT, emails from foundations, anonymous donors, curious scientists. And then the impossible happened. Knock on the janitor's room door. He opened it to see Professor Worthington himself, standing stiffly, awkwardly, holding a piece of paper. "I misjudged you," the professor said. "It was wrong. I saw the uniform and not the mind. And for that, I am sorry." Jamal didn't know what to say. "This," Worthington said, handing him the letter, "is an offer. I spoke to the administration. A full scholarship. You belong in the classroom, not outside it." Jamal's hands trembled as he took the letter. The words on the page blurred as his eyes filled. That night, he stood outside the same lecture hall B, watching the stars break through the clouds above the building. He thought of his grandmother, long past now, who always said, "God gave you a mind that shines, baby. Don't let no one dim it." For the first time in years, Jamal let himself dream out loud. But what he didn't know was that this story, this quiet, miraculous shift, was just beginning. And in the shadows, someone else was watching. Someone who had their own past tangled, with expectations, race, and silence. Someone who wasn't ready for what Jamal was about to awaken in an institution long blind to its own limits. Because sometimes, the real revolution doesn't come in marches or headlines. Sometimes, it walks in with a mop and rewrites everything. The following week, Jamal stood in front of a chalkboard, not to clean it, but to teach from it. It wasn't official, not yet. But Professor Worthington, in an act that stunned the faculty and electrified the student body, invited him to co-lead a problem-solving session in advanced theoretical mechanics. Half the class showed up just to see if it was real. The other half didn't believe it until Jamal picked up the chalk and spoke. There was no arrogance in his voice, no swagger, just clarity. Confidence born not from recognition, but from survival. He walked the students through vector fields and quantum potentials as if they were storytelling tools. The equations weren't abstract. They were alive, and he brought them to life in ways no textbook ever could, and every person in that room felt it. Even Worthington, who stood at the back, arms crossed, watching a young man rewrite the meaning of brilliance with every line he drew. But in the quiet corners of Monroe University, not everyone celebrated. Some faculty members whispered behind closed doors. Some alumni weren't impressed. The donations, they feared, would dry up if exceptions were made. There were questions like, what kind of message are we sending? And is raw talent enough without credentials? Jamal heard the murmurs, and they hurt. But what hurt more was the way a few professors spoke over him in meetings, praised him in public, then dismissed him in private, or asked him to explain basic concepts he had already proven he'd mastered, just to double-check. Still, he showed up, every day, every lecture, every study group, because Jamal knew the truth. Some doors didn't swing open. They had to be broken down. Maya stuck by him. She was now his closest friend, sometimes dragging him to student events, sometimes sneaking into the library with him after hours just to solve hypothetical problems for fun. Her second article, From Mop to Mind, Jamal Reed is More. Then a moment went national. That's when MIT called. They offered him a spot in a summer research fellowship. No interview, no application, just an acknowledgement that genius, once uncovered, could no longer be buried. Jamal accepted, but not before visiting the one place he'd avoided for years, the small brick house on 37th Street, with a cracked mailbox and a porch swing that had once been his sanctuary. His mother opened the door stunned, tears welled in her eyes. "You really doing it, huh?" she whispered. He nodded. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. She held him for a long time, and in that moment, all the broken pieces of their past, missed birthdays, unpaid bills, late-night arguments, melted into something stronger: pride. The day he left for Boston, Worthington handed him an envelope. Inside was a single sheet, a letter of recommendation, yes, but more than that, a handwritten note. Genius is not measured by degrees, but by what one dares to understand. In silence, "You taught me that, thank you. E.W." Boston was unlike anything Jamal had ever known. The MIT campus buzzed with minds on fire. The labs felt like science fiction. People talked about bending time and decoding dark matter like they were discussing the weather. At first, Jamal felt small again, but the fear didn't last, because one by one, the other students, some with perfect SAT scores and private tutors, started coming to him with questions. They called him Reed the Resolver. He had a way of simplifying the impossible, not because he was smarter, but because he had learned everything the hard way, and that kind of learning leaves scars that double as insight. By midsummer, the department head asked him to co-author a paper. By fall, NASA called. But before he said yes to anything, Jamal returned to Monroe for one more talk. This time, he stood in front of a full auditorium. No mop, no shame. Just a black suit, a soft smile, and a story people wouldn't forget. He didn't open with equations. He opened with a question. How many brilliant minds do we never meet because they don't look like what we expect genius to look like? Silence. Then he spoke about labels, about being mistaken for less, about growing up in a world that praised his silence more than his questions. He told them about the night his grandma died and how he'd stared at the stars, wondering if the universe even noticed. He told them about scrubbing toilets with physics books in his backpack, about watching lectures through cracked screens and solving equations while others slept. And then he looked out into the crowd, eyes shining. There are thousands more like me. Kids cleaning halls, working night shifts, fixing cars, watching the world move without them. Not because they're less, but because no one ever asked them to solve the problem. A pause. Then he added softly, "But what if we did?" The room exploded into applause. Not the polite kind, the thunderous kind. The kind that shakes you. Among the crowd, Professor Worthington stood and clapped until his hands turned red. But one person in the back wasn't clapping. Dr. Helen Avery. One of the university's oldest faculty members. Brilliant, cold, feared. She'd once mentored Nobel Prize winners, but she never smiled. Rumor had it her own son left home after failing to meet her impossible expectations. She stared at Jamal with an unreadable expression, and after the talk, as people rushed to hug him, thank him, shake his hand, she slipped away. Until the next morning. She found him on the campus lawn, sketching orbits in his notebook, lost in thought. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly. He looked up. "My son," she said. He waited. He loved physics. Not like you, but he tried. I pushed him too hard. Expected perfection. When he left, I told myself he was weak. But now, watching you, I see it clearly. He wasn't weak. I was blind." Jamal didn't know what to say. She pulled something from her coat pocket. A sealed envelope. "This is from him. He sent it years ago. I never opened it. Couldn't bear to. Maybe now. I'll find the courage." Jamal nodded, and something passed between them. Not words, not forgiveness, but healing. That night, Maya found him on the roof of the old science building, watching the stars again. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He pointed upward. "Those?" She grinned. "Still dreaming big?" He turned to her. "No," he said. "Now I'm planning." A breeze passed. She leaned closer. "So, what's next, Mr. Reed?" He looked out into the night. Eyes steady. "I want to build something. A place where kids like me don't have to be janitors to get a seat in the classroom, where brilliance doesn't depend on your zip code." Maya's eyes glistened. "And I want you there, helping tell their stories." She laughed through her tears. "You couldn't keep me away." A few years later, that dream had a name. The Reed Institute for Equal Science. It wasn't just a school, it was a revolution. A hub for underprivileged youth gifted in STEM, offering full scholarships, mentorship, and a platform to change the world. The first class included kids from shelters, rural farms, refugee camps, and every single one of them walked into those halls knowing they belonged. And in the center of it all stood Jamal, still humble, still hungry to learn, and forever changed by the day one professor tried to humiliate him, only to discover he'd unknowingly challenged a genius. But even more than that, a young man who taught the world that kindness, belief, and the courage to ask the right question could turn the quietest voice into the loudest change. And somewhere, in a small grave in Georgia, beneath an old oak tree, the wind whispered through the leaves, as if his grandma was smiling.